I've been an exterminator in Louisiana for over a decade. You get used to strange calls out here: raccoons in attics, gators in pools, and of course, snakes. But last summer, I got a call I'll never forget. It was from a woman who lived deep in the bayou. She didn't give me much detail, just said there was a snake in her house and that I needed to come. Her voice was low and deliberate, like she was carefully picking each word. She didn't say what kind of snake it was, how big it was, or even where it was. Just, you need to come. Her house was nearly impossible to find. It was miles down an unmarked dirt road, surrounded by swamp on all sides. By the time I got there, I was running low on gas and patience. The house itself was a weathered shack, leaning like it was tired of standing. There was no car outside, no neighbors in sight, just the hum of the swamp and the faint smell of smoke from the chimney. She opened the door before I could knock, thin, gray-haired, her face sharp and unreadable. She didn't say hello, didn't explain anything, just motioned for me to follow her inside. The air inside was heavy and damp, smelling of herbs and something sharp and metallic. The walls were covered in strange symbols drawn in a faded reddish-brown, and jars filled with cloudy liquids lined the shelves. Inside the jars were things I couldn't identify: feathers, bones, what looked like teeth. A table in the corner held an assortment of candles burned down to wax puddles, arranged around a black cloth-covered surface. She led me to the back room and pointed to a shadowy corner. "It's there," she said, and that was all. The snake was like nothing I'd ever seen. Its scales were pitch black and gleamed as if wet, even in the dim light. Its eyes were a deep, unsettling red, almost glowing. It wasn't moving, but it wasn't scared of me either. It just stared unblinking, as if sizing me up. "That's not native," I muttered, more to myself than to her. She didn't reply, just stood in the doorway, watching as I worked. Getting the snake into my cage was easier than it should have been. It didn't resist, didn't hiss, didn't strike. It let me handle it, which made me even more uneasy. Normally, I'd call wildlife control immediately for something like this, but out here, nothing happens quickly. They told me it'd be at least 3 days before someone could come out. I figured keeping the snake in my garage until then wouldn't be a problem. That night, I dreamed of the snake. The details are fuzzy. Dreams always are, but I remember its eyes. They seemed bigger, brighter, glowing against a dark background. I felt like I couldn't move, like something heavy was pressing down on me. When I woke up, my heart was racing, and my hand, where I'd held the cage, felt strangely cold. The next day, I noticed Daisy, my dog, acting strange. She's usually curious about the garage, always sniffing around, but now she wouldn't go near it. She sat at the door, her ears pinned back, growling low in her throat. Then there were the other things. Little things at first. Lights flickering even though the wiring in my house is solid. The sound of something shifting in the garage when I knew the snake was in its cage. I'd find items in places I didn't remember leaving them. My phone on the kitchen counter when I swear I left it on the table, a set of keys on the floor by the door. That night, the dream was worse. I remember water, dark, still water, and the feeling of being watched. The snake was there, moving through the water like it belonged, but it wasn't just a snake anymore. It felt larger, like it was a part of the swamp itself. There were voices too, faint and whispery, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I woke up drenched in sweat. The image of those red eyes burned into my mind. By the third day, the tension was unbearable. Every sound in the house made me jump. Even in daylight, the shadows in the corners of the garage seemed too dark, and Daisy would whimper whenever I went near the door. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just a snake. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the damn thing bit me. I was cleaning out the cage, trying to reassure myself that this was just another job, when it happened. 1 second, the snake was still, coiled in the corner of the cage. The next, it was on me. Its body moved faster than I thought possible, a blur of black and red. I didn't even feel the bite at first, just a sharp, wet pressure on the back of my hand. Then pain, sudden and deep, radiating up my arm. I yanked my hand back, and the snake retreated to its corner as if nothing had happened. My heart was racing, my breath coming in short gasps. I looked down at my hand. 2 perfect puncture marks stared back at me, already swelling. My hand felt wrong, not just painful, but cold, like the blood in my veins had turned to ice. I ran inside, cleaned the wound, and wrapped it up tight. It's not venomous, I told myself. It's just a snake. But the throbbing didn't stop, and by morning, the skin around the bite had turned dark, almost black. The doctor didn't have any answers. No sign of infection, they said, but their voice wavered, and I could tell they were puzzled. It should heal on its own. Just keep it clean. But it didn't heal. Days passed, and the puncture marks stayed raw, the skin around them dark and cold. I tried to take a picture of the snake to send to wildlife control, but no matter how steady I held the camera, the images always came out blurry. The snake's body was a dark smear, and its eyes were just two red streaks. It was like the camera couldn't focus on it. When wildlife control finally arrived, the guy who came to pick it up frowned the moment he saw it. "What is that?" he asked. "I was hoping you could tell me," I said. He shook his head. "It's definitely not from the U.S. Never seen anything like it before." He loaded the cage into his truck, and I felt a weight lift off my chest as he drove away. But the relief didn't last long. The bite on my hand still hasn't healed. Months later, it's just two dark scars that throb whenever I think about the snake or the woman who called me out to that house. Wildlife control never followed up, and I didn't press them. Whatever that snake was, wherever it came from, I don't want to know. Some things are better left unanswered.